On Valentine's Day night, I waited for Ethan all night long, but he ended up spending the night with my sister. I had a car accident on my way to find him. On the phone, he was cold and impatient. "Amelia, if there's anything, wait until I get back to talk about it." I opened my mouth, and a large amount of blood gushed out. I squeezed out my last sentence. "If I die, will you regret it? We'll talk about it when you're dead." Hang up. On Valentine's Day, I stayed in the empty home, keeping my eyes open until dawn. When I opened my WeChat moments, I saw the updated posts. In the photo, she was leaning sweetly on a man's shoulder with a charming smile. The caption read, "My beloved baby." I felt a chill in my heart. Because I recognized that man. The hexagram tattoo below his collarbone was so dazzling. I remembered it very clearly because I went with my husband to get that tattoo. He kept saying he was busy, but it turned out that he was with another woman. Grace is my half-sister. Ever since we were little, whatever I had, she had to have one too, be it clothes, shoes, or toys. But I never expected that she would even try to snatch my boyfriend away. Because I'm the older sister, I had always been told to be courteous and give way to my sister. As long as she liked something, I had to pretend to be magnanimous. But this time, the one she wanted to snatch was Ethan, the man I had loved for 5 years. No matter what, I couldn't just give him up. I grabbed my phone, put on my coat and rushed out the door. I recognized the background in Grace's photo. Ethan was at her home. Just as I went downstairs, suddenly my phone rang. I thought it was Ethan calling, but it turned out to be my father. "Hey, Amelia. Grace has been having trouble sleeping and is a bit neurasthenic. Your room is quieter, so vacate it for Grace to use. The nanny who takes care of us can live in her room." I couldn't believe it. "Dad, if I give her my room, where will I sleep when I come home?" "You can stay in a hotel outside." "Amelia, you're the most sensible one." My lips trembled, and then I heard the phone being hung up. The family kept saying that I was the most sensible one, but they just forced me to give everything to my sister. I had always known that the family favored Grace, who was good at sweet-talking and coaxing people. But this time, even my room was gone. Were they trying to drive me out completely? I clicked on that photo again, and Grace's expression really hurt me deeply. Her sweetness was like a knife, stabbing hard into my heart. She was showing off her happiness, showing off that she was always better than me, showing off that she always got more love. My father favored her more, my friends liked her more, and even Ethan loved her more. Tears dropped onto the screen of my phone one by one, and my vision became blurred. I could give up everything, but not my lover. I rushed to the downstairs of Grace's house and looked up. The lights in her house were on. This house was in a great location, quiet and convenient. Originally, I was the one who took a fancy to it first. I happily followed Ethan to view the house and had already planned what kind of decoration style to adopt. Unexpectedly, a week later, Ethan suddenly told me that the house had been registered under Grace's name. I was stunned at that time. He clearly knew how much I liked this house. However, Ethan said, "Amelia, Grace really likes this house. She said she wanted to sit on the big balcony, drinking coffee while basking in the sun. Since you're the older sister, just let her have it." But I also liked that big balcony very much. He knew it clearly, but as long as Grace asked for it, she could easily snatch away the things I liked. Thinking of this, my heart began to ache faintly again. At this moment, I saw Grace coming to the balcony to collect the clothes. Suddenly, I noticed that Ethan's clothes were hanging all over it. She just happened to look down and her eyes met mine. Then, she showed a provocative smile. She hugged the clothes and went inside, and then she and Ethan kissed passionately in front of the French window on the balcony. She knew that I could see them. Ethan hugged her tightly with his arms, kissing her devotedly and attentively. I hadn't seen him like this for a long time. I couldn't even remember when was the last time I kissed him. I just stood there motionless, as if deliberately torturing myself, allowing the heartache to overwhelm me. When they finally finished kissing, Ethan bent down and picked Grace up horizontally and then walked into the living room. I couldn't see them anymore. Under the dim streetlight, I suddenly let out a hoarse cry. There is no greater grief than the death of the heart. I walked out of the community in a daze, and then my phone vibrated. I clicked on it and saw that it was a WeChat message from Grace. There was only one photo on it. It was a pair of hands holding each other, with couple rings on the fingers. Suddenly, I gasped for breath like a dying person. I had accidentally seen that pair of couple rings in the depths of Ethan's drawer when I was tidying up the room. At that time, I thought he had secretly prepared them for me. I was so pleasantly surprised and then pretended that I didn't know anything and put them back. I had fantasized about when he would suddenly take them out and put them on my hand, wanting to see my touched and tearful expression. Unexpectedly, they were prepared by Ethan for Grace. While I was lost in thought, a car out of control rushed towards me. By the time I noticed the danger approaching, it was too late to dodge. With a bang, I was hit hard and flew out, and then slammed heavily onto the ground. Intense pain swept through my whole body. Instinctively, I dialed Ethan's number. After it rang more than 10 times, the phone was answered, and Ethan's impatient voice came. "Didn't I say I was busy? Amelia, if there's anything, wait until I get back to talk about it." I suddenly coughed up a big mouthful of blood, and my vision went black in waves. I squeezed out a hoarse voice from my throat and asked him, enduring the heart-wrenching pain, "If I die, will you regret it?" On the other end of the phone, Ethan's cold voice was so clear. "We'll talk about it when you're dead. Hang up." I couldn't help laughing out loud. The laughter was hoarse and crazy, and large amounts of blood gushed out of my mouth. Some people exclaimed and gathered around, then dialed the 120 emergency number. Exhausted, I closed my eyes and thought to myself, "Ethan, I'm really dying. I won't bother you anymore." Suddenly, I felt my body become lighter, as if something was pulling me. I opened my eyes and found that I had actually floated out of my twisted body on the ground and was suspended in midair, semi-transparent. Was this the so-called out-of-body experience in legends? I was a bit bewildered, but then I realized that none of the people in the noisy crowd could see me. I saw that someone had called the 120 number, and the ambulance soon came speeding over and then carried me into the vehicle. I subconsciously wanted to follow, but then I found that I couldn't get close to the ambulance at all. What was going on? Seeing the ambulance getting farther and farther away from me, I couldn't help feeling anxious. At this moment, I suddenly felt as if I was being pulled by a thread. Then, after feeling dizzy for a while, I found myself actually in Grace's home. I was stunned and then found Ethan right beside me. He was standing on the balcony smoking. I didn't see Grace's figure. Maybe she had gone to rest? Since Ethan couldn't see me beside him, my eyes fell on him without restraint. I hadn't looked at him at such a close distance for a long time. He was still as handsome as ever. Even when frowning, he could still easily make people's hearts race. But when I thought about how he had been fooling around with Grace and the couple rings that Grace had shown off, my heart ached again and again. I loved him so much, but he stabbed my heart mercilessly. Even when I was on the verge of death just now, he was still so cold to me on the phone. I stood there silently and watched him take out his phone and dial my number. After the phone rang many times, it hung up automatically. There was a look of shock on Ethan's face, as if he couldn't believe that there would be a day when I wouldn't answer his phone. Then he dialed several more times, but it was the same result. Anger rose on Ethan's face and he gritted his teeth and said, "Amelia, what the hell are you doing?" I stood beside him and gave a bitter smile. "I'm already dead, Ethan." Suddenly, at this time, Grace's voice came, "Brother Ethan, where are you?" Her voice was delicate and also had a sense of weakness. Ethan immediately restrained the expression on his face and then walked back into the room. As soon as he took a step, my body involuntarily moved with him. I could hardly stay more than 1 meter away from his body. I didn't understand why this was the case, so I had to follow him into Grace's room. Grace was wearing a sexy black nightgown, with her breasts half covered and half exposed, looking very alluring. "Brother Ethan, I just had a nightmare and I'm so scared. Why didn't you accompany me?" Seeing Grace's delicate and aggrieved look, Ethan hugged her shoulders affectionately. "Silly girl, I'm here. Don't be afraid. Grace snuggled in Ethan's arms and looked pitiful as she raised her head. Brother Ethan, if you don't go back tonight, will sister be angry? When I was mentioned, Ethan frowned again. It's okay. You don't need to worry about her. Grace nodded pitifully. Okay, I'm just worried that sister will be angry and will blame me for troubling you again. I stood aside and watched her pretentious look, feeling a chill in my heart. Every time, Grace was like this, using that weak appearance to arouse others' desire to protect her. Clearly, it was she who mercilessly snatched away everything from me, but everyone felt sorry for her and favored her, while no one paid attention to me. I watched Ethan gently kiss her forehead. You're the younger sister, so of course she should give in to you. I'm already dead. Why does my heart still ache when I see this scene in front of me? My soul was bound to Ethan and I couldn't go anywhere. He and Grace hugged each other and fell asleep, and I could only stay within a distance of 1 meter, staring blankly as the sky gradually changed from black to bright. In the following days, I was always with Ethan. Whether he was at work or going home, I followed him around. Of course, he couldn't see me at all. He couldn't get through to my phone for several consecutive days, and his anger grew heavier. He grasped the phone, gnashing his teeth. Amelia, how dare you not answer my phone? Are you playing hard to get or something? I just found it ridiculous. In his heart, was I such a person? He didn't even think about whether I might have really had an accident. I stood aside silently, feeling that the person I had loved for so many years was really a scumbag. At this time, Ethan's phone rang. Excuse me. Is this Mr. Ethan? We are from the police station. Do you know Miss Amelia? Ethan's face darkened. Yes, she's my girlfriend. Has she caused any trouble? The other person's voice was serious. No, Miss Amelia had a car accident. She was sent to the hospital for rescue but unfortunately passed away. The perpetrator has been arrested. Ethan looked disbelief. You said Amelia's dead? Impossible. He finally broke off the engagement. Then the other person directly asked Ethan to go to the hospital morgue to claim my body. Ethan angrily hung up the phone, shouting that the other person was a liar. Seeing him like this, I felt so cold in my heart. He still thought that I was just being moody and throwing a tantrum. He didn't even believe the news of my death. When he gloomily arrived at the hospital, I found that my parents had also come to the morgue. Ethan's face was very ugly. He took a step forward, grasped the white cloth covering me and lifted it up. Seeing my pale face exposed, Ethan subconsciously trembled his hand. Impossible. This can't be. Are you kidding me? My parents rubbed their eyes. That damn perpetrator. This time we must make him pay us a large sum of money. Otherwise, wouldn't our Amelia have died in vain? I felt a chill all over my body. These were my parents. Even when seeing my body, their first reaction wasn't to burst into tears but to calculate how much compensation they could get. Ethan's face became terrifying, with a mixture of anger and shock on it. He stared fixedly at my body. Amelia, wake up immediately. Don't think that you can get away with feigning death. My body lay there quietly, motionless. Ethan stared at it for a long while, and then suddenly gave a fierce kick to the cabinet beside him. With a loud bang, everyone was startled. At this time, I heard Grace's voice. Mom, Dad, Brother Ethan, is sister really dead? I turned around and saw that Grace had appeared behind me at some point. There were tears in her eyes, her face was pale, and she looked on the verge of collapsing. Ethan's expression softened a little. He stepped forward and hugged her by the shoulders. Why did you come here all of a sudden? It's gloomy in here, and you're not in good health. Don't get too close. Mom and Dad also hurried over. Yes, Grace. Don't come in. Let's go out and talk. I followed Ethan and went out together. Grace said timidly, how could sister die in a car accident all of a sudden? It's so scary. Mom and Dad quickly comforted her, telling her not to be afraid. However, Grace burst into tears and fell into Ethan's arms. Brother Ethan, I don't have a sister anymore. What should I do in the future? Ethan felt extremely distressed. Silly girl, I'm here, aren't I? I will definitely take good care of you. Mom and Dad watched the two of them cuddling together like that and didn't show any dissatisfaction at all. Yes, Ethan. There's only Grace left as our daughter in the family. You can't abandon her. We'll entrust Grace to you in the future. I watched them being so close. What a harmonious family they were. My body was still lying coldly in the morgue, yet no one cared. It turned out that I had been an outsider from the very beginning to the very end. I gave a bitter smile. I really wanted to stay away, but my soul was bound beside Ethan, forced to watch them. After that, Grace naturally became Ethan's girlfriend. To be more precise, she was his fiancée, because I heard my parents discussing the marriage between Ethan and Grace with him. Ethan, it's not that we, as parents, are impatient. The main thing is that Grace has always been in poor health. If you two get married earlier, she can have a family and someone to rely on earlier, and then we, as parents, can feel at ease. I watched my parents saying this to Ethan, but in my mind, I remembered the different expressions they had when they knew that Ethan and I were in a relationship. You're still young. What's the rush? Spend more time taking care of your sister. Do you hear me? I was so naive back then. I thought that my parents were reluctant to see me get married. Later, when I saw Grace and Ethan getting along and my parents were smiling beside them, saying that they looked so well matched, I finally understood. It wasn't that they were reluctant to part with me at all. In their hearts, Grace was the top priority. Even when it came to getting married and starting a family, Grace came first. And I, as the so-called older sister, was supposed to work hard to earn money, subsidize the family, take care of my sister, and be like an old ox working hard all the time. They were both my parents, yet they could be so partial. Sometimes I wondered why they had given birth to me. What was the difference between me and an outsider in this family? I watched my mother take out a small package from the room and then unwrap the cloth outside. Inside was a jade bracelet of excellent quality. I had never seen it before. Presumably, my mother had hidden it very well. Then I saw her put the bracelet on Grace's wrist. Grace, this is a precious heirloom passed down by Mom. You're going to marry Ethan. Mom will give this bracelet to you. Grace stroked the bracelet on her hand, looking very surprised and delighted. Thank you, Mom. It's so beautiful. She was all smiles and suddenly remembered something. Mom, were you going to give this bracelet to sister at first? After all, sister was with brother Ethan at that time. Mom immediately exclaimed, "What are you talking about, silly girl? This is specially reserved for you by Mom. It has nothing to do with her." I took a deep breath and once again felt a sense of irony. We had the same mother, but what Grace had, I didn't, and she said it so frankly. The smile on Grace's face became a bit touched. Mom, you're so kind to me. It's such a pity that sister isn't here now and can't attend my wedding. Ethan held her hand, looking a bit absent-minded, but Grace didn't notice. She was just concentrating on looking at the jade bracelet on her wrist. I stood aside and slowly closed my eyes. Grace, even if I'm dead, you still wish that I could come back to life on the spot and watch how happy you are and how miserable I am, right? You won. As the wedding date of Ethan and Grace was approaching, Ethan, contrary to his usual behavior, was getting busier and busier at work. In fact, many times, he didn't need to work overtime so desperately, but he was always throwing himself into work, and his smoking addiction was getting heavier and heavier. The whole person was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. One day, he was working overtime in the office. Grace called him and asked him when he would be home. Ethan replied while smoking, "Go to sleep first. I still have to be busy for a while here. Don't wait for me." After hanging up the phone, Ethan walked to the window, looking at the deep night outside. His expression was very gloomy. I thought he was a bit strange. Suddenly, I saw him take out his phone and dial a series of numbers. It was my mobile phone number. He dialed it, and the other end showed that the number was out of service due to arrears. I was already dead, so naturally I hadn't paid the phone bill anymore. After a while, I heard Ethan say in a deep voice, "How could you really be dead?" I felt a bit bewildered. I knew better than anyone else how perfunctory and cold Ethan had been to me before. When I was on the verge of death, I asked him if he would regret it if I died. It was he who said those heartless words like, "We'll talk about it when you're dead," with his own mouth. Now that I'm really dead, isn't it just as he wished? He liked Grace so much. Isn't it just right that he can be with Grace openly and aboveboard now? I thought self-mockingly. Of course, Ethan didn't know anything. He just put out his cigarette and continued to work overtime in front of the computer. I couldn't stay too far away from him either, so I could only watch him work overtime. Ethan used to smoke before, but he had never been so addicted to cigarettes as he was now. He smoked a whole pack a day, which was really frightening. Grace had also complained several times about the strong smell of cigarettes on him. Ethan rubbed his brow wearily. "Sorry, I'll go take a shower." Grace asked him if there was something bothering him at work recently. Ethan shook his head and didn't say anything. Soon it was time to take wedding photos. That day, I followed Ethan and went there together. Grace was very excited and had been choosing the dresses for the photo shoot. In contrast, Ethan seemed a bit absent-minded. He didn't respond until Grace called him several times. "What's the matter?" Ethan walked over and gently put his hand on Grace's shoulder. Grace pouted her red lips. "Brother Ethan, what's wrong with you recently? Is it because you're getting married soon and under a lot of pressure?" Ethan smiled. "Maybe. Isn't there a saying called pre-wedding depression?" Grace was amused by him and laughed. "Isn't that something only girls have?" Ethan lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. "Guys can have it too. I'm worried about what I'll do if I can't take good care of you." Grace acted coquettishly and snuggled in his arms. "No way. Brother Ethan has always been so nice to me." I fell in love with Brother Ethan at first sight. Ethan couldn't help smiling when he heard that and stroked her head. "Me too." Suddenly, I remembered the scene when they first met. At that time, I had just been in a relationship with Ethan for about a month, and our relationship was quite good back then. One day, I suddenly received a call from my family asking me to buy something and bring it back, saying that Grace wanted it. I was used to my parents worrying about everything for Grace, so I didn't say anything. Ethan saw that I had bought so many things, so he offered to drive me home and even helped me carry the things upstairs. This was the opportunity for Ethan to meet Grace for the first time. I remembered it very clearly. When we just entered the door, Grace had been chatting and acting coquettish with my parents. After seeing me, she called me sister, and then her eyes fell on Ethan behind me. She showed a shy look of a young girl. "Sister, who is he?" I introduced that he was my new boyfriend Ethan, and then Ethan greeted my family very politely. Grace walked over shyly to shake hands with Ethan. Ethan reached out and held her small hand, and Grace immediately blushed. At that time, I just thought that Grace hadn't had much contact with the opposite sex and was shy, and Ethan just shook hands politely and then let go and came over to put his arm around my shoulder, so I didn't think much about it at all. It was just an unintentional act on my part, but it ended up helping them two get together. How ironic. When taking the wedding photos, Grace had been wearing a sweet smile all the time and looking at Ethan with a look full of dependence. Even the photographer said that they were a perfect match. I couldn't help turning my head away and not looking at them. The man who once hugged me and said that he wanted to marry me and have a family with me was now taking wedding photos affectionately with another woman. Was there anything more heartbreaking than this in the world? During the break while taking the wedding photos, Grace went to the makeup artist to touch up her makeup, while Ethan went outside to smoke. He was becoming more and more dependent on cigarettes now. He stood there smoking, with a vacant expression on his face and emotions in his eyes that I couldn't understand. Wasn't he finally able to marry the woman he loved? He should be happy. Then I saw him answer the phone. "Hello, who is it?" The voice on the other end of the phone was so loud that I could hear it clearly even standing beside him. "Hello? Is this Mr. Ethan? This is the courier station. Miss Amelia has a courier that hasn't been picked up for a long time. We found your number that she left before and contacted you. Please come and pick up the courier as soon as possible." Ethan said in a hoarse voice, "Send me the address." After taking the wedding photos, Ethan sent Grace home and then drove to the courier station. The staff handed him a heavy package. I thought for a long time but couldn't remember what I had bought before. Ethan opened the package and was stunned for a moment. "What's this?" I leaned over to look and found that it was the photo album I had compiled before. I had specially sent the electronic photos to the store to have them printed out and put them in an album. Ethan's hands trembled a little. While flipping through the album, he couldn't help taking out a cigarette and smoking it. The photos inside were taken when we went out to play and got along in daily life in the past. In the photos, we were in an intimate pose, leaning against each other, laughing, looking into each other's eyes, and kissing. Every time I saw a photo, the scene at that time would come to my mind. At that time, we were in the passionate stage of our relationship and deeply in love. We often kissed and hugged each other. At that time, I thought I was the happiest person in the world because I had a man who loved me to the core. But how long had it been since I saw such an Ethan? Presumably, he himself had forgotten how much we loved each other back then. He looked through the photos carefully one by one without saying a word. I couldn't understand his expression. I just felt that he seemed to be suppressing something. Until he flipped to the last photo, which was a picture of us kissing on the beach. It was taken beautifully, and our expressions were happy and intoxicated. How happy we were back then, and how lonely we are now. I couldn't bear to look anymore and turned my head away. However, Ethan took out the last photo, then pursed his lips, as if there was something he wanted to say. But I waited for a long time and didn't hear him say anything. In the end, he just stuffed that photo into the inner layer of his wallet. I paused for a moment and couldn't help thinking, why keep this photo? I'm already dead, and you're going to marry another woman. But now I'm just a soul that no one can see, so I could only watch him hide my photo and then take the photo album home. He went back to the home where we used to live. He hadn't been back there since I died. When he opened the door and went in, there was a thin layer of dust in the house. Ethan opened the windows to let in some fresh air and then called a cleaner to come and do the cleaning. I watched silently and wondered if he wanted to clean up the place and then sell the house. The cleaner was efficient and finished the thorough cleaning in 2 hours. Ethan paid the money and then walked into our former bedroom. All my things were still there. Ethan stood in the room for a while and then put the photo album in the drawer beside the bed. But when he opened the drawer, he paused for a moment and took out a small box from inside. As soon as I saw that small box, I immediately remembered it. It was the anniversary gift I had prepared for him. Because 2 weeks before my car accident, it was only 2 weeks away from our anniversary. Ethan opened the delicate small box, and inside lay a watch quietly. It was the style that he had said he liked very much before, but it had been out of stock all the time. To buy it, I didn't hesitate to spend a large amount of money on round-trip air tickets and flew to the overseas counter to purchase it specifically. But before I could give it to him, I was already dead. Ethan hung his head. I couldn't see his expression clearly. He stared at the watch quietly for a long time. It was so long that I thought he had fallen asleep. Then he finally took the watch out. He turned the watch over and saw that there were initials engraved on the back of the watch, which were A and E, the initials of the last characters of our 2 names. Amelia. I heard Ethan call my name softly, and then he slowly put the watch on. It fit perfectly. I felt a bit sad for no reason. I had hoped so much to see his surprised expression before, but now, seeing that he had discovered this gift, I felt a sense of melancholy that things had changed while people remained the same. That day, Ethan sat in our former room for a long time. It wasn't until Grace called him several times that he got up and left. I followed him and found that I couldn't understand this man anymore. Clearly, he was the one who fell in love with someone else first. Clearly, he became cold and perfunctory towards me. But now that I'm already dead, why did he seem to have such a hard time accepting this fact? I thought self-mockingly. Was it because Ethan had a guilty conscience after I died and felt too sorry for me? Time passed quickly. Ethan and Grace's wedding was in 3 days. My parents had been busy with their wedding affairs. After all, the one getting married was their most beloved younger daughter. Naturally, they had to do everything by themselves and make everything the best. The hotel they booked was the most luxurious one, and they spared no expense on the wedding decoration, which was dreamy and grand. As for Grace's wedding dress, they even invited a designer to make it to measure, and it was very expensive. Unlike Grace, who was full of anticipation, Ethan didn't show any sense of joy of a person who was about to get married at all. He smoked more and more heavily. One pack a day wasn't enough for him. The whole person seemed to be buried in smoke. Obviously, his mood was very low. I was a bit puzzled. He had clearly got everything he wanted. I sighed. I had been with him for so many years. I originally thought that he loved me as much as I loved him, but it turned out that I was wrong later. And now, I still couldn't understand him either. At this time, Ethan turned around and walked to the door of the room. Just as he pushed the door open and went in, he heard my parents chatting. Alas, Grace is going to get married soon. I'm really reluctant to part with her in my heart. Don't be sad. The place where we live is not far from Grace's. We can still visit her often after she gets married. Come to think of it, what that fortune teller said back then was really right. Thanks to Amelia bringing good luck to Grace, Grace could grow up healthily. Yes, actually, we've been nice to Amelia all these years. We've treated her as our own daughter. Hearing this, not only was Ethan stunned, but I was also shocked. What did that mean? I'm not their biological daughter? Ethan asked the question on my behalf. What do you mean? Isn't Amelia your biological daughter? My parents obviously didn't expect that he was at the door. They paused for a moment and then said awkwardly, "This matter is exactly what you heard. Amelia is our adopted daughter." Ethan's jaw tightened and his voice was deep. What on earth is going on? My parents looked at each other and then told this old story. It turned out that soon after they got married, they loved each other deeply, but they couldn't conceive a child. At that time, they went to a fortune teller, who said that they didn't have a good fate with children and that they had to adopt a daughter first in order to have their own child. So they really went to the welfare home and adopted me when I was just a few months old. Later, when I was 2 years old, my mother really got pregnant and gave birth to Grace. But Grace was born weak and often fell ill. They went to that fortune teller again, and the fortune teller said that they had to raise me well so that their biological daughter could grow up healthily. After hearing them out, my heart sank to the bottom. I didn't expect that the truth of the matter was like this. No wonder I had always felt that they were so partial and didn't love me at all. It turned out that I wasn't their biological child. At this time, I heard Ethan ask, "Where is the welfare home where you adopted Amelia?" My parents looked at each other and then told Ethan the address of the welfare home. Then Ethan immediately drove off, and I was forced to follow him all the time. I had very mixed feelings. I never expected that I would only learn my real origin after I died. 2 hours later, Ethan finally drove to that welfare home. More than 20 years had passed, and the welfare home looked rather dilapidated. As soon as Ethan walked into the welfare home, he saw several dirty children running around on the ground barefoot. Never thought that I actually came from this place. Just as I was lost in thought, an old man with white hair came over. "Hello. Who are you looking for?" Ethan said in a deep voice, "Hello. I'd like to look for someone's file. She was adopted from here." The old man said that he was the director of the welfare home and then asked Ethan what the name of the adoptee was. Ethan told him my name, and the director then went to the dusty reference room to look for my personal file. After about half an hour, the director said happily, "I've finally found it. This is Amelia's personal file when she was adopted." The director handed over a pamphlet. Ethan took it and opened it. There was an old 1-inch photo pasted inside. It was me when I was just a few months old. I looked so round-eyed, innocent and cute. The director sighed beside him. I didn't expect that after so many years, there would still be someone coming to look for her file. When she was sent to the welfare home back then, I was wondering why such a beautiful and healthy baby girl was abandoned. Later, I learned that her mother was a student who got pregnant by accident and really couldn't raise her, so she sent her here in tears. After reading my personal file, Ethan asked again, "Did that person come to the welfare home later?" The director shook his head, but then suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned around and rummaged in the cabinet and found a small cloth bag. By the way, that mother left some things back then. But when Amelia was adopted, her adoptive parents didn't take them away. I'll give them to you now. Please help pass them on to her. The director handed over the small cloth bag. Ethan opened it and saw that there was a very small jade pendant inside. Although so much time had passed, it still had a warm and smooth color, and there was a character engraved on it. Ethan carefully put the jade pendant away and then found that there was also a small note in the cloth bag. He unfolded it and saw delicate handwriting. I also leaned over to look. There were just a few lines on it. Hello, kind-hearted person. Thank you for adopting my daughter. I love her very much. Unfortunately, I didn't have the ability to support her. I've worn this jade pendant since I was a child. I'll leave it to her as a keepsake. I couldn't help crying. It turned out that there was still someone in this world who loved me selflessly. It was my biological mother. Ethan thanked the director and then left with the jade pendant and the note. I followed behind him and found that the place he was driving to was getting more and more remote. Finally, he stopped in front of a cemetery. I was stunned for a moment, and then I saw Ethan buy a bunch of chrysanthemums and walked silently into the cemetery. Then he stopped in front of a tombstone. I saw that my photo was pasted on the tombstone, and I was smiling gently in the photo. When did he even set up a tombstone for me? And what shocked me even more was the words on the tombstone, which read, "The tomb of Ethan's beloved wife." I looked at Ethan in disbelief, and then I saw him gently place the chrysanthemums on my tombstone, and then took out the jade pendant and the note. Amelia, these are the things your mother left for you. I brought them all to you today. Ethan's voice was hoarse. Under my gaze, he wrapped the note around the jade pendant and then placed them in front of the flower vase on my tombstone. He only said this and then silently burned paper money for me. Suddenly, I felt a strong sense of grief from him. How could this be? So he was also sad because of my death? I looked at him in surprise, as if I didn't recognize him anymore. When Ethan finally finished burning the paper money, he stood up, looked at my photo quietly for a long while, and then left. Ethan and Grace's wedding arrived as scheduled. Due to customs, the two couldn't meet the day before the wedding, so Grace stayed at her own home while Ethan stayed at the home where we used to live. However, he smoked all night and didn't sleep at all. I watched him quietly beside him and felt that he was weighed down with worry. The next morning, he put on a brand new suit and went downstairs. At this time, he should have driven to pick up the bride. But somehow, I felt inexplicably uneasy in my heart. I always had a feeling that something was going to happen. I was quite familiar with the road to Grace's home. Just as he was about to drive to the downstairs of Grace's home, suddenly a person rushed out onto the road. I was startled, and Ethan immediately stepped on the brakes. But the other person still fell to the ground. Ethan immediately got out of the car to check. The other person was a young girl, and it seemed that her leg was scratched and bleeding continuously. Ethan frowned. "I'll take you to the hospital." With that, he immediately picked the person up and put her in the car, then turned the steering wheel and drove towards the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, Ethan carried the girl to find a doctor. Fortunately, the girl's bones were okay. It was just a scrape on the skin, and she only needed to have the wound cleaned and bandaged. At this time, Grace called. Her voice was very anxious. "Where on earth are you? The auspicious time has already passed." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose wearily. "I'm at the hospital. I accidentally hit someone on the road." When Grace heard this, her voice became shrill. "Brother Ethan, then come and pick me up quickly." Ethan was silent for a while on the phone and then said, "Grace, I'm sorry." After saying that, Ethan hung up the phone and then took out his cigarette case and started smoking. At this time, his phone rang again. It was my parents calling. Ethan picked up the phone, and on the other end was the same anxious tone as Grace's. Ethan listened to them with a tense face and then said, "Uncle, Auntie, I'm sorry. I can't marry Grace." Amid their continuous questioning, Ethan didn't explain anything and just hung up directly. I looked at him full of doubts. Why did he change his mind at the last minute? Was it because of me? When the injured girl had her wound bandaged, Ethan paid the medical bill and then left. He didn't go to pick up Grace but drove directly to the seaside. I couldn't go anywhere and could only follow him. When we got to the seaside, I suddenly remembered that I had been here before. Back then, when Ethan and I were passionately in love, he brought me to this place, set off fireworks for me, and then we kissed under the brilliant fireworks. I looked at the beach with some emotion, and then I watched Ethan actually go to the nearby small store and buy the same kind of fireworks that we had set off before. Then he sat alone by the seaside and set them off. But it was still daytime now, and the fireworks looked rather ridiculous and funny. Ethan looked up at the fireworks, his eyes a bit red, and then I heard him call my name. Amelia, can you see it? Didn't you like watching the fireworks I set off very much before? I thought I didn't love you anymore, but I never thought that you would die. Only then did I realize that I simply couldn't accept that you were gone. Am I so silly? If you were still alive, you would surely laugh at me. I couldn't help sighing as I listened to his soliloquy. I really hadn't thought that he still loved me after all. But now that I'm already dead, what's the use of saying these things? The harm had already been done, and we couldn't go back to the past. I accompanied Ethan from daytime until night. He didn't move at all, just like a statue. Just as I was wondering when on earth he would go home, Ethan finally stood up and then walked forward step by step. I was startled at once. Was he crazy? There was the sea in front. However, Ethan couldn't hear my shouts at all. There was still a bit of a relieved smile on his face as he slowly walked into the seawater. I watched helplessly as the seawater gradually covered his body until it completely swallowed him up. At this time, I don't know who set off fireworks by the seaside. With a loud bang, a big and gorgeous firework bloomed in the pitch-dark night sky. And at this very moment, the sea was calm, as black as ink. I stood on the shore for a long time and never saw Ethan again.